Sarah Pringle was not always a name whispered in fear. Once she was just a girl, a quiet girl, often overlooked, often alone. She found solace in strange places, in things others discarded. She saw beauty where others saw decay. This peculiar fascination started young, a tiny seed of an idea. It was an idea that would fester and grow. It would grow into something monstrous, something unstoppable. The world was not ready for Sarah Pringle. The world did not understand the power she would soon wield. Her first true encounter was with a forgotten loaf. It sat in a damp, dark corner of the school pantry. Others wrinkled their noses at the sight. They saw rot, a sign of waste. Sarah saw something else. She saw life, vibrant and relentless. Blues, greens, and velvety whites painted the stale crust. It was a miniature world, a thriving ecosystem. She touched it, a strange curiosity blooming within her. This was not an ending, she thought. This was a beginning, a powerful, silent revolution happening right there. This moment became her obsession. Moldy bread was her muse, her strange comfort. She collected samples hidden away in her room, jars filled with forgotten sourdoughs, rye breads, and simple white loaves. Each cultivated a unique tapestry of fungal growth. She studied them for hours, mesmerized by their slow, deliberate conquest. She learned their names, their needs, their silent language. They were her friends, her confidants, in a world that offered little else. Her parents worried, her teachers were concerned, but Sarah only smiled, a secret understanding in her eyes. The obsession deepened, twisting into a strange philosophy. Freshness was a lie, she decided. It was a fleeting, artificial state. True strength, true endurance lay in the mold. Mold was the great recycler, the patient transformer. It broke down the old to create the new. It was nature's true power, often ignored, often reviled. Sarah Pringle decided she would no longer ignore it. She would champion it. She would become its voice, its architect, its queen. The world would soon learn to respect the mold. Years passed. Sarah grew, and so did her vision. She was no longer a solitary girl with a strange hobby. She was a woman with a purpose, a chillingly clear goal. She started to find others like her, those on the fringes, people who felt discarded, overlooked, and drawn to the unconventional. They were drawn to Sarah's quiet intensity, her unwavering belief. She spoke of a new world, a world reborn through decay. The Moldy Bread Society began to form, first in whispers, then in secret meetings. These meetings were held in damp basements and forgotten warehouses, the air thick with the scent of earth and yeast. Moldy bread was their symbol, their sacrament. Sarah preached her gospel of growth and reclamation. She was surprisingly charismatic, her voice low but compelling. She promised them power, a role in the coming transformation. Those who joined were often desperate, disillusioned with the clean, sterile world outside. They found a strange belonging in the society's embrace, under Sarah's unwavering gaze. They were the first spores of her growing army. The society grew in numbers, a hidden network spreading like mycelium. They gathered resources, stockpiling vast quantities of bread. They experimented, guided by Sarah's deepening knowledge of fungal properties. Not all molds were equal, she taught them. Some were passive, some were potent. She sought specific strains, cultivating them with meticulous care. There was a dark purpose to these experiments, a purpose that chilled even some of her most loyal followers. But her conviction held them, bound them to her strange, unfolding plan. Sarah Pringle was becoming a leader, a cult figure of sorts. Her followers revered her, saw her as a prophet of a new age. They called her the matriarch of mold, the spore shepherdess. She accepted these titles with a faint, knowing smile. She knew her power was growing, not just over these lost souls, but over the very forces of nature she had come to master. The time for secrecy was drawing to a close. Soon, the Moldy Bread Society would emerge from the shadows, and Britain would tremble before its fungal might. The culmination of Sarah's research was terrifying. It was beyond anything her followers could have imagined. She had learned to do more than just cultivate mold. She had learned to animate it, to give it a grotesque form of life. Using a potent, genetically altered strain of fungus and a horrifying process, she created them, the mushroom men. They were her enforcers, her silent, unthinking soldiers. They were the true horror at the heart of her revolution, creatures born of decay and dark science. These were not men in any true sense. They were vaguely humanoid figures, shambling and distorted. Their bodies were a composite of compressed, hardened mold and fungal growths. Patches of green, black and grey covered their forms. Mushrooms sprouted from their shoulders and heads, some glowing faintly in the dark. They moved with a slow, deliberate gait, but with surprising strength. They made no sound, save for the soft squelch of their steps and the occasional rustle of their fungal skin. Their very presence was an abomination, an affront to nature. Their loyalty to Sarah Pringle was absolute, unthinking. They were extensions of her will, controlled by a complex series of pheromonal cues she emitted. She had designed them this way. No independent thought, no fear, no pain, only obedience. They were the perfect army for her cause. They could withstand incredible damage, their fungal bodies slowly regenerating. And they had a terrifying ability. Their touch could spread the unique fungal spores, initiating a slow, horrifying transformation in their victims. This was a fate worse than death. Sarah looked upon her creations with a cold sense of pride. These were her children, her fungal foot soldiers. They were the instruments of her grand design. With them, she could dismantle the old world, piece by piece. The Moldy Bread Society members were in awe and in terror of these beings. But their faith in Sarah, or perhaps their fear of her, kept them in line. The mushroom men were ready. The stage was set for a takeover unlike any Britain had ever seen. The air itself seemed to crackle with impending doom. The day of reckoning arrived. It was a grey, oppressive morning. The sky matched the colour of the mould that Sarah so adored. She gave the order. It was time. The mushroom men lumbered into action, their silent ranks filling the society's hidden strongholds. Her followers, pale and nervous, scurried to make final preparations. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of fungal spores and raw fear. Sarah Pringle herself was calm, her eyes gleaming with a chilling focus. Today, Britain would change forever. Her mode of transport was a statement in itself. A carriage, crafted entirely from hardened, interwoven loaves of mouldy bread. Blues, greens and greys formed its grotesque yet strangely regal structure. It was pulled not by horses, but by a dozen of her strongest mushroom men. They strained silently, their fungal forms glistening. Sarah ascended into the carriage, her expression serene. She was a queen in her decaying chariot, ready to claim her throne. This was her coronation march, a symbol of her power. The procession began, emerging from the hidden depths into the unsuspecting streets. At first there was confusion. People stopped and stared. What was this bizarre spectacle? This grotesque parade? The carriage, the silent, hulking figures pulling it, the woman seated within? It was like something from a nightmare, a dark fairy tale come to life. The initial disbelief soon turned to unease, then to outright panic as the mushroom men began to assert their presence, pushing aside anything that blocked their path. News travelled fast, distorted through whispers and panicked phone calls. A strange army was on the move, headed for the heart of government. The Moldy Bread Society, once a fringe rumour, was now a terrifying reality. Sarah Pringle, in her mouldy carriage, advanced steadily. She did not rush. She savoured the growing chaos, the dawning realisation of her power. Each squelching step of her mushroom men was a drumbeat, heralding the arrival of a new fungal order. Downing Street awaited its most unwelcome visitor. Section 5. At the Gates of Power, the Moldy siege begins. The procession reached Whitehall. Government buildings stood like nervous sentinels. The usual bustle of politicians and civil servants was replaced by an eerie quiet. Doors were locked, windows shuttered. Word of Sarah Pringle's approach had sent ripples of fear through the corridors of power. Police barricades had been hastily erected, but they looked flimsy, almost pathetic, against the backdrop of the approaching fungal horde. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of mould. Sarah's mouldy bread carriage came to a halt before the black, iconic gates of Downing Street. A line of armed police officers stood guard, their faces grim. Behind them, the famous number 10 door seemed to watch, impassive. For a moment, there was silence. A tense, charged silence. Sarah Pringle remained seated in her carriage, her gaze fixed on the Prime Minister's residence. She did not need to shout. Her presence and the silent ranks of her mushroom men spoke volumes. They were a grotesque army at the doorstep of democracy. The police chief, a man with fear in his eyes but duty in his voice, stepped forward. He held a megaphone, his hand trembling slightly. He ordered them to disperse. He warned them of the consequences. His words echoed weakly in the unnatural stillness. Sarah Pringle merely smiled, a slow, cold smile. She raised a hand, a delicate, pale hand. It was a signal, a silent command to her fungal forces. The time for negotiation was over. The siege was about to turn violent. The mushroom men stirred. A low, collective rustle, like dry leaves skittering across concrete, emanated from their ranks. They took a step forward, then another. Their movements were synchronized, unnervingly precise. The police officers tensed, their weapons raised. But there was a dawning horror in their eyes. They were facing something unknown, something unnatural, something their training had never prepared them for. The Moldy takeover of Downing Street had truly begun. The heart of British power was under direct assault. Section 6. The spore breach number 10 falls. The attack was swift and brutal. The mushroom men did not charge with roars or battle cries. They advanced with a terrifying, silent purpose. Bullets from the police firearms thudded into their fungal bodies. Some staggered, chunks of mould flying off them. But they did not fall. They did not stop. Their strange physiology absorbed the impact, their forms already decaying and regenerating. The officers watched in disbelief and growing terror as their standard weapons proved largely ineffective against these horrors. Panic erupted among the defenders. Some officers broke ranks and fled, their courage shattered by the sight of these relentless, unnatural foes. The mushroom men reached the gates. With their combined, unearthly strength, they tore the wrought iron from its hinges. Metal shrieked and buckled. The first line of defense was breached. The remaining bodyguards, now hopelessly outnumbered, fought bravely but futilely. The touch of the mushroom men was their greatest fear, the spores promising a fate worse than any bullet. Sarah Pringle watched impassively from her carriage. Her expression was one of grim satisfaction. This was inevitable. This was the power of the mould. The mushroom men surged past the broken gates, towards the iconic black door of number 10. A few brave souls tried to hold the entrance. They were quickly overwhelmed, their shouts of defiance turning into screams of terror as the fungal soldiers swarmed them. There was no finesse, only brute, relentless force. The door, a symbol of British governance, began to splinter under their assault. With a final, sickening crunch, the door of 10 Downing Street was torn from its frame. It crashed inwards, a cloud of dust and splinters filling the air. The mushroom men poured into the hallowed building, their squelching footsteps echoing in the suddenly violated space. Alarms blared, a frantic, useless noise. Sarah Pringle slowly descended from her carriage. She walked calmly through the wreckage, her fungal soldiers parting to let her pass. She had breached the bastion. She was inside. The Prime Minister awaited. Section 7. A Prime Minister's Peril, the Fungal Ultimatum. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in the cabinet room. He was not a man easily shaken, but the reports flooding in were beyond belief. Grotesque creatures, unstoppable. Now they were inside. He could hear the sounds, the distant screams, the heavy, wet footsteps getting closer. His security detail, loyal to the end, were making their last stand outside the room. He knew it was futile. He stood, composed but grim, as the door to the cabinet room shuddered. Then it burst open. Sarah Pringle entered. She was flanked by 2 towering mushroom men. Their fungal presence filled the room with a damp, earthy smell. Sarah looked at the Prime Minister. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion save for a chilling certainty. "Mr. Starmer," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "We meet at last." Keir Starmer stared back, his face a mask of controlled anger and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this, Pringle? What do you want?" he demanded, his voice strained. He knew this was no ordinary protest. Sarah Pringle smiled faintly. "I want a new Britain, Prime Minister. A Britain that embraces true strength. The strength of the mould." She paused, letting her words sink in. "From this day forward, fresh bread will be illegal. Only mouldy bread will be produced, distributed and consumed." Starmer's eyes widened. He thought she was mad. That's insane. The people will never accept it. It's barbaric, he retorted, his voice rising. This was beyond any crisis he had ever imagined facing. Oh, they will accept it, Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. Because the alternative is far less palatable. She gestured to one of her mushroom men. Those caught consuming or possessing fresh bread will be converted. They will join my children. They will understand the beauty of the mold from the inside out. Her threat hung heavy in the air, more terrifying than any bomb or bullet. She was proposing a fundamental reordering of society enforced by biological horror. Starmer felt a cold dread grip his heart. This was a nightmare. Section 8. Britain under the blight. A nation crumbles. As Sarah Pringle delivered her ultimatum, her mushroom men were already fanning out across London and beyond. Similar scenes of chaos and disbelief were unfolding in cities and towns throughout Britain. The initial takeover of key infrastructure was swift. Communication hubs, transport networks, food distribution centres, all fell to the silent, relentless advance of the fungal soldiers. Local police forces were overwhelmed. Desperate calls for help went unanswered. The country was being systematically crippled. The British military was mobilised. Tanks rolled onto the streets. Soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, faced an enemy they couldn't comprehend. Their weapons, designed to stop flesh and steel, had limited effect on the regenerative fungal forms of the mushroom men. For everyone they managed to partially disable, two more seemed to take its place, emerging from hidden networks or newly converted citizens. The sight of friends and colleagues succumbing to the spores, their bodies twisting into fungal parodies, shattered morale. The fight was not just physical, it was psychological. News reports, initially frantic and confused, became sparse, then silent. The media outlets were overrun. The internet flickered, then died in many areas. Whispers and rumours became the only source of information, spreading fear like wildfire. Stories of entire towns falling silent, of people hiding in their homes, terrified of the squelching footsteps outside, of a creeping green-grey tide consuming everything. Britain was descending into a dark age, a fungal dystopia, orchestrated by one woman's obsession. The old world was visibly rotting away. Sarah Pringle showed Prime Minister Starmer live feeds. Screens in the cabinet room flickered to life, displaying scenes of military defeat. Soldiers retreating, tanks swarmed by fungal figures, cities shrouded in a strange, spore-filled haze. "This is the future, Mr. Starmer," Sarah said softly, her voice a chilling counterpoint to the images of destruction. "Your armies cannot stop it. Your technology is useless. The age of fresh bread is over. The age of mold has begun." The Prime Minister watched, his face ashen, the hope draining from him with every horrifying image. Section 9. The needed surrender. A new order dawns. Keir Starmer stared at the screens. His shoulders slumped. The images were undeniable. His nation was falling. His military, one of the world's finest, was being systematically dismantled by mold. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was reality. He looked at Sarah Pringle, this quiet woman who had unleashed an apocalypse. Her eyes held no triumph, only a calm, unwavering conviction. He saw no room for negotiation, no hint of mercy. Only the stark choice she had presented. He thought of the people, the fear, the transformations. The idea of a nation forced to consume mouldy bread was repulsive. But the alternative, a nation of mushroom men, was a horror beyond comprehension. His duty, he realized with a sickening lurch, was now to mitigate the suffering, to choose the lesser of two grotesque evils. The fight was lost before it had truly begun. He felt a profound, soul-crushing weariness. The weight of a nation's defeat settled upon him. His personal resistance was meaningless now. "You leave me no choice," Starmer said, his voice barely a whisper. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "If I agree, will the attacks stop? Will you control your creations?" He could hardly bring himself to say it. He was surrendering his country to a madwoman and her fungal army. He was sanctioning a future he could barely imagine, a future built on decay and enforced by monstrous beings. This was the lowest point in Britain's long-storied history. Sarah Pringle nodded slowly. The violence will cease. My children will maintain order. The new laws will be implemented. Britain will adapt. It will learn to appreciate the true cycle of life and decay. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. You have made a wise decision, Prime Minister. She turned to leave, her mushroom men parting before her. Keir Starmer remained, alone in the violated cabinet room, the scent of mould already seeping into the ancient wood. Britain's fresh dawn had been replaced by a fungal twilight. The mouldy bread takeover was complete.